Our school principal, Mr. Perry, he wrote in his October newsletter, a couple of weeks ago, there was a protest march in Canada called the 1 Million March for Children. If you've read about this, you might be confused about what's happening. I want to bring to your attention one issue that is critically important to parents and what was being objected to by the marchers. That is the policy of schools to conceal gender transitioning from parents. You should care about this issue because it removes the role of parents in being involved in significant life-changing decisions in raising their children and puts it in the power of government authorities. You may think you are safe from this government action since your children are in a Catholic school. To some degree, you are, but governments have the power to change this. I ask you to watch this issue closely and let your MP and MLA know your opinion. So praise God, Mr. Perry is taking action to defend parents and children. Let's now look at the gospel. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap Jesus in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. So the first thing to notice is that the Pharisees and Herodians are working together. That is an unholy alliance because the Pharisees and Herodians actually disagree with each other on many things. But because Jesus is a common enemy, they will work together. In a similar way, according to scholar Carl Trueman, the transgender and queer ideologies weren't originally part of the lesbian and gay movement in the 1980s. By definition, people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual admit that gender is binary. But the transgender and queer movements, they joined the LGB when they saw that it was advantageous. This is why the famous gay journalist named Andrew Sullivan, he wrote, "It is not transphobic for a gay man not to be attracted to a trans man. For Mr. Sullivan, a transgender man is female." And Canadian journalist Sue Ann Levy, she just wrote, it's a long quote, so you can follow along. She wrote, "I am a lesbian. The queer activists do not speak for me. This is a huge part of the takeaway from Wednesday's 1 Million March for Children. Most gays like me, conservative or liberal, just want to live their lives. We also agree with letting children be children. And we disagree with the concept of ramming pronouns and gender identity down the throats of kids as young as 5. It's absurd and bordering on abusive. When I was growing up and suspected I was different, I waited for years to determine whether those feelings were legitimate. But the kids in Canadian schools have no chance in 2023. The loud minority of queer activists and school board administrators are hell-bent to convince kids who likely have never even thought of such sophisticated concepts that there are dozens of genders and they may not have been born in the right body. Perhaps kids have an issue with gender dysmorphia. Perhaps they are tomboys or effeminate, but many will grow out of it or decide they are LGB instead of mutilating their bodies for life with puberty blockers. But the efforts of the past few days during which they marched proclaiming the parents participating in the 1 Million March for Children were ultra right-wing, transphobic, and hateful take their manipulation to a whole new level. This borders on evil. They are playing with kids' lives. Now here is the point I'm trying to make. The LGBTQ movement is not as unified as it seems. It actually contradicts itself. So to support one part of the movement, it doesn't mean you have to support all of it. People within the movement make all sorts of distinctions, and that means we can too. And one distinction we make is that we love all people, but we can disagree firmly with what they advocate for. The Pharisees and Herodians went and plotted to entrap Jesus in what he said. "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with truth and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" Entrapment is the right word. They're giving Jesus a no-win situation. So if he says, yeah, pay taxes to the emperor, then he's betraying his own people to a foreign enemy, the Romans. But if he says, no, you should not pay taxes, then they're going to report him to the Roman governor. Entrapment also happens in our culture. So many people will say to us, Jesus loved all people, so you should love your children who are trans. Or, shouldn't you be more compassionate and call your children by their preferred pronouns? Or they'll say, do you want a live son or a dead daughter, or vice versa? We'll come back to these three questions later on. One transgender activist, Rachel McKinnon, a biological man who transitioned to female, says this to young people.
I want you to know that it's okay to walk away from unsupportive or disrespectful or even abusive parents. And I want to give you hope that you can find what we call your glitter family, your queer family.
So why do people, activists, support breaking up families like that? Part of the entrapment model is that they start the indoctrination early on. In Durham, Ontario, one public school uses a book for grade 1s about a girl who wants her teacher to call her Max. Here in BC, Revelstoke High School had a workshop for students grade 9 and up about, quote, accessing gender-affirming care. That means puberty blockers, removing healthy breasts and penises, creating fake breasts and penises. And it goes on, self-advocacy and where to direct your parents for support. So that is wrong. Children do not tell their parents how to accept surgery that damages a healthy body. And according to one Ontario school board, staff must keep a student's gender identity and gender expression status confidential unless the student gives explicit consent to inform the parents. So you should know that this is already in your public schools, or it will be coming to your public schools, and activists want this taught at St. Anthony's, at Little Flower, at Vancouver College, and at St. Patrick's High School. We know this because it's already happening in Catholic schools across the country. In Halifax, there was a group of parents activists who wanted this book removed from public libraries because they said the library should stand up to hate speech. I just finished reading this book, and the author, Abigail Schreier, is fair. She interviewed so many transgender supporters. She just shared their opinions, which exposes that many are anti-science and do not have the welfare of children ultimately in mind. And she's also beautifully empathetic to children who want to transition. The vast majority are girls who never doubted their sex as children. They were often intelligent, but lonely and needing help, and so they turned to social media. But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites?" Now notice that Jesus is not naive. Jesus is aware of their malice. So we too need to be aware many activists will bully us, and so we can do what Jesus did. We can point out someone's hypocrisy as long as we do it with charity, because we love activists. We should. And that journalist, Sue Ann Levy, she wrote this: while the activists labeled the 1 million marchers as bigots, they had trouble reconciling the fact that many of the marchers were Muslim moms, a very group they allegedly protect. It was amusing to watch their hypocrisy. Jesus continues, "Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." So on the coin was the image of Caesar. Now, the book of Genesis says that every human person is made in the image and likeness of God. So whenever you look at a human person, you see God's image stamped on the human person. So that means that if coins belong to Caesar, this also means that the human person, all of us, we belong ultimately to God. This is important because there were some Marxist activists counter-protesting, and they said, whose kids? Our kids.
Whose kids? Our kids! Whose kids? Our kids! Whose schools? Our schools! Whose schools? Our schools!
Now, when we say, these are my children, or we say, this is my spouse, or these are my parents, when we use that language, we don't mean we possess someone in the sense of objects. No one owns children because they are persons. What do we mean by that? These are my children. It means that we have a sacred responsibility to love them. So parents have a God-given duty to love and raise their children, but these activists have no such duty. Mr. Perry reminded parents it's a sacred teaching of the Bible and church that parents are the primary teachers of their children. No one can usurp this duty or right. So give taxes to the government, but never give your children because they do not love them. Jesus loves all people, but he never agrees with sin. And so here is our action item. Defend your children, defend their innocence, and defend their bodies. Speak out against puberty blockers, which stops the healthy human process. Speak out against transgender surgery for children. To love children means never allowing them to lose healthy body parts. Maybe this week you might want to talk to one other parent about this issue, just so that you can support each other and strengthen each other. Jesus was compassionate, and so we should listen to young people, their needs, their sufferings, and their concerns. I was shocked when I read that there were some parents, they actually swore at their children when their children started going down this transgender path. That's obviously wrong. But at the opposite end, permissiveness is also unhelpful. There is a woman named Denise. She doesn't give her last name for fear of reprisal. She founded a website for parents called Fourth Wave Now. She advises parents, don't use your children's new name or pronouns. She said this kind of tough love, it worked for her own daughter. Her own daughter transitioned to being identified as male for a few years and then has since desisted. But this mother Denise says, parents, you have to find your own limits, however. And then parents who were interviewed by Abigail Schreier, a lot of them supported the LGBTQ movement. They're very supportive, but then they were shocked to find out that as soon as they supported their children's transitioning, it actually made things worse because they were confirming them in a false identity. And finally, remember what Erin Kimberly says about the suicide statistic of transgender people. Erin is a Canadian registered nurse, born a woman, but transitioned to a man. We've shown this video before.
Well, what's being sold to the families is that these kids will all commit suicide if they're not medicalized. So parents are being told that, and there's no evidence to that effect. So I think it's really inappropriate to tell families that when we have there's no evidence that there's a direct path from not being immediately medicalized and suicide. There is evidence that people with this condition are more likely to have other mental health issues like depression and anxiety, and are on average have more suicidal ideation. But we can't say for certain that suicidal ideation is directly because of the gender dysphoria. We don't know that. I mean, the suicidality rates are higher for any mental health condition, including kids that have ADHD, autism, any number of other conditions, social isolation, nor being gay or lesbian. But there's certainly no evidence that these kids are all going to act on those thoughts if they're not immediately medicalized. So that's really, I think, a kind of emotional blackmail for these parents who are now afraid that if I don't go along with this and accept these treatments, that my child is.
I'm going to lose my child, basically.
When they heard this, the Pharisees and Herodians were amazed, and they left Jesus and went away. Maybe the world will similarly be amazed if we have more compassion for children who are struggling, if we love our enemies, and if we speak the truth in love.